Hello, Yora homers. I am pleased to show you the assembly tonight of the much anticipated Y-axis upgrade kit for the YoraHome 3018 Pro. This kit will double the length of the Y-axis from 180 millimeters, 18 centimeters, to 360 millimeters or 36 centimeters. Apologize in advance for the background noise. The fans on my 3D printer farms are pretty loud. I'm deep in production of the laser shield upgrade kits, so we don't really have a quiet background, but I'm sure you can hear me well enough for this. I just got this kit yesterday, and I believe I've identified sort of the most efficient and straightforward way to install it, so hopefully it makes sense to everyone tonight. You're going to need your 3018 Pro, your Y-axis upgrade kit, which I will go through the components in a minute, a way to measure millimeters. I have this ruler, but anything will work. Metric hex drivers. So the original tools that came with the 3018 will work fine for this, but I always use sort of my own handled ones because it's faster. That's pretty much it. As far as the kit goes, what you will find included is a second table. You will find some bakelite supports that go underneath to fuse the tables together and provide mount points for the linear bearings. You will find two new bearing rods, one new threaded rod, and you'll find two new longer 2040 T-slot rail. In addition, as far as hardware, there will be a packet of 24, I believe they're 30 millimeter T-nuts. And then there's bolts of varying sizes. Very important to note the sizes. Write them on the bags. They're very light, but I did. These are 25 millimeter. These are all the same size screw. They're just different lengths. So there's 25 millimeter, 20 millimeter, 15 millimeter, and 14 millimeter. And then you have these two blocks. There should be 825s, 820s, 815s, two 14s, and then two of these little rectangular nuts. And the 14s and the rectangular nuts go together. That's why there's two of each. And then the rest of the bolts predominantly are for the bottom. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of move things around here. First thing we need to do is disassemble our 3018 to a point. So I'm going to demonstrate what I feel is the most efficient way to do this. Remove any laser shields if you spot one. The remainder of the gantry can actually stay, and I believe we should be able to install this without taking the gantry apart. I don't have any cable management on here because I'm working on a drag chain upgrade for this. But you will need to unplug the Y stepper, which is the one in the back. That's the only plug you should have to remove. Then, once you've done that, what you'll want to do is actually remove the 4 millimeter hex key. You're going to want to remove all 6 screws on the side of the gantry. Doesn't matter which, because you're going to do both. When you do the last one, it'll kind of fall, it might fall down a little bit. because these are actually what kind of hold it up. So don't be alarmed if that happens. See how it just fell. And you're going to want to put these aside. And then turn your machine around to whichever side you didn't do. And you're going to unscrew the 6 screws on the other side. And like I said, it will kind of fall down, not very far. Now, what you're going to want to do next is take your gantry, you can lift it right out of the way. And again, as long as you unplug that Y-axis motor, the gantry is now free. We're going to lay it kind of back there out of the way, I think. Actually, I'm going to change my mind here. I really want it out of the way. We're going to need space. So, we'll put her back there. Okay. So we really aren't going to need that till we reattach things. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is these T-nuts that were left from removing the gantry. You want to be careful because there's nothing really holding them in. Sometimes they're loose, sometimes they're not. So what you can actually do is take one of the screws that you remove from the gantry, and using it you can kind of pull whichever ones are loose at least out, because you do not want to lose these. There are no extras. So yeah, you don't want these to become lost. Sometimes they're in there pretty good, and if they are, just kind of leave them. We'll get them after, because we are going to have to remove them. But turn it around, do the same for the other side. Any of these T-nuts that are loose, go ahead and pull out. In this case, I really only have the one. Alright, if they're tight, just remember they're there, because we got to remove them. So the next step is we're going to take the what is it? Let's see this side. I think it's a 2mm. So take your 2mm hex key and loosen the 2 grub screws that attach the threaded rod to the coupler on the motor. This should allow your bed to slide freely now. Pull this out of the coupler so that it's not in the coupler anymore. And then you can go ahead and remove the screws that are in the front, holding the front bake light plate on. Okay, now this plate, gently you should be able to slide it out through the threaded rod, and just kind of put that aside, and then slide your head right out. That should slide right out. You can kind of flip it upside down, put it aside. Now we're going to go ahead and turn around the frame. We're going to go ahead and remove the other 6 screws that are on the other side. You can leave this stepper attached. Doesn't need to come off. Again, remembering we've got these T-nuts. If you weren't able to recover them, you're going to be stuck in there. We're going to recover those next after we're done taking this thing apart. So these are the old linear rods. We're not going to need those anymore. The new kit has longer ones. So you just put those aside. Alright, put the big plate stepper aside. This is where we can try to recover these things. Sometimes they, again, I find if you just put a screw in them and kind of wiggle it, they'll come loose. Let me see if I can get a close up of this without bumping the camera. So these will be kind of stuck in here. If you screw a screw in a little bit, just kind of wiggle it, it will dislodge it. And then you can either bring it to the end, or sometimes they'll turn right in place. I'll do one more for you. So like, just kind of screw it in a little bit, and just wiggle it, and you can bring it to the end and take it out. And these 2040 rails are now superfluous. We do not need them, so you can put them aside. Save them for a project or a rainy day or whatever. We're not going to need them for those. Sometimes these things just don't like to come out. Funny, sometimes they all fall out. And then sometimes they fight. But definitely don't lose them. You should have a total of 12. There's 6 on each side. Alright. So again, you can put the other rail away. Just going to move these up near the gantry. They're out of the way. Alright, next is need to disassemble the bed. So you can manually sort of unscrew the threaded rod. Now when you get close to this nut block, this is spring loaded, remember, so you're going to have to hold it, because once you get to a certain point, it's going to pop out. Don't lose that, because you need that. And you keep unscrewing this. You don't need this threaded rod anymore. Okay. Now I do want to point out the orientation, because the orientation is going to be maintained with the new setup. But for demonstration purposes, notice the short, this is offset, it's not in the center. So when you talk about the edges, you want that shorter gap towards the edges on both sides. Additionally, when the nut block, where that copper part goes, the anti-backlash nut and spring, this points back towards the stepper motor. So I'm just pointing out the orientation because we need to maintain that when we put it together with the new bed. So go ahead and the quickest way I found for this is just you can either loosen them and slide them out and then kind of do this, or you can go ahead and remove the screws all the way and kick out the T-nuts. It's really preference. These things love to get stuck. All of these screws that you're taking out for this whole process, they're the same length. You can actually put them in one big pile. So put the bearings, these are linear bearings, put them aside. We are reusing them. The new bed uses the same linear bearings. We don't add new ones because if we did, we wouldn't have full travel. So your kit doesn't come with these because we don't need any more. So I'm going to show you how all that works in a minute here. So I'm doing it sort of that way. And you can kick these out. Your new kit actually comes with all new T-nuts, so these are actually going to be extra. They are the same, but the kit is complete with enough to make the whole setup. So. Sometimes these things really fight you. There. So we're going to collect the remaining T-nuts. There are a total of 10, but again, those are actually, we don't need them because we have new ones, so you can put those aside. Now, this is basically the point we need to get to assemble the new upgrade. Now this table isn't flat here, so you definitely want to do this on as flat a surface. No, you want to do it on a flat surface. So I'm going to kind of rejigger how I've got some things here because it's really important that these are flat. So this is where we're going to take our new plate. The side with 4 slots is the top. We want the bottom. So it is symmetrical otherwise. So it doesn't really matter which way around it goes, as long as the slide with the 3 slots is on top. So we are looking at the bottom. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting with these 2 small blocks here. We're going to place one on each end. So I'm just going to show you the placement. This is where these are going to be going. Now, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you the placement of the remaining components of this kit, just so you have some sense of what we're building. Sometimes it helps people visualize. So this is what we're going to be aiming for. And what these plates are doing is they're fusing these 2 beds together to one big bed. And they're also providing proper mount support for the linear bearings. And this is where all the different size screws come in. So I'm going to point out a couple of things real quick here. First thing, the only 2 components of all of this that we're going to tighten all the way right now are these 2 end blocks. These are stationary. All they do is fuse these 2 beds together, and there's no other interaction. So those 2 can be tightened once we have everything square and aligned. The rest of them, we're going to put the screws in, but everything's going to stay relatively loose because we have to get proper alignment, just like when we built the machine originally with the linear bearing rods and the linear bearings, and as well as the threaded rods. So I'm going to walk you through this. Again, this is sort of the way I feel is the fastest. So once we secure these two sort of end points, we're not going to be able to put more T-nuts in. So we actually have to insert all the T-nuts for each row that we need. So if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 in these 2 rows we need to insert. So if you want to open your bag of 24 T-nuts, we are going to be using all of these. And these go in. Show on the camera, I want to be very clear. With this side facing up. Okay, so this side faces up when you insert these. The rounded side faces down. So you'll notice as I insert these, and again, there are 8 per row. So I'm going to put 1, 2. Note, I'm orienting them this way. Same way they went in when you built it originally. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to actually do the exact same thing in this one here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now while we're at it, we may as well do the other one. So we can do it, these is 4. And I'll be honest, the easiest way to do this one is 1, 2 here. 1, 2 here. And we could have done 4 and 4. Doesn't really matter in these middle ones. We could have done 4 on this side and 4 on that side. For the sake of the video, I did it all on one side. So 2 there. And 2 there. Okay, so you notice everything's all inserted. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove, because again I was just demonstrating where these parts go. I'm going to remove them because we're going to start with just these 2. So what I'm going to be doing is moving one bearing down, or one T-nut down, and the rest of them I'm just going to kind of move into the middle so they're out of the way. I'm going to leave one here and here. So this is where we're going to use. Now, you know what, I'm going to put things back because I want to explain one more thing. The screw lengths, okay? So what you have left are these, the 2 rectangular nuts and the 2 14 millimeters. Those are actually going to go in here. I'll show you that in a bit. Put them aside for a minute. Then you have 8, 8, and 8. 25, 20. We're backwards. It's 15, so I'm out of the order here. What are 15s? 25, 20, 15. So, the ones that go in these 2, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4 are all going to be the 20 millimeter ones. Alright? So right now, I'm going to take out 4 because we're not ready to put the rest in. Just to kind of complete the thought, these outer 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, so there's 8 of those. Those are the 15 millimeter ones. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are actually going to be where these mount. So they need to be longer, and that's where the 25 millimeter ones go. Just again to tell you where things are going to go. I will say which ones to use as we do each step. So right now we're working with these two. We need 4 20 millimeter screws. So you just kind of I just hand screw them in initially. And again, of all of what we're doing here, these are going to be the only two pieces that we actually tighten all the way. Everything else we are going to leave loose. So for now we're going to hand screw these in. Alright, now the idea here is we're going to kind of tighten these up, but not quite all the way. So I turn it the right way. Alright, so I'm pretty much all the way there. Tighten this one up pretty much all the way. Now, just loosen it enough so you can move it. And what we're going to do is we're going to push these two plates together. And we're going to feel on the edges basically until they're kind of flush with each other. And then holding them together, we're going to pull this over to the side until we feel that it's flush here. And then once we've done that, we kind of tighten it down. You know, double check it. Make sure it's flush where these two meet. This is flush and it's together on basically on both sides, and that this and this are flush together here. You can just kind of feel it up. Once you're confident you have that, go ahead and tighten it all the way down. You're going to do the exact same thing. Now it should mostly be there on the other side. You really, on this side, you're just feeling for flush between this part and the back. And making sure they're together. Now on this side, again, we're just feeling for that it's flush in the rear here. And I'm going to point out, you can't put these on without all these bearings in here, or T-nuts in here rather. If you do, you're going to have problems because you're not going to be able to get them in. It just blocks the way. Okay, so you kind of have options on the next ones that we do. So I'm going to save this for last because we actually have some extra work to do. So I'm going to put that one aside for now. Let's do these ones. So kind of line them up. Now I'm going to point something out. On one side, these are not symmetrical. If you look at them, on one side there's an inset. See it? The other side there isn't. This inset is going to be the way we're assembling. We want to point up because the screws are actually going to go into this inset so that they're flush. So just they are symmetrical this way, but not this way. So make sure the inset's pointing up. So what I'm going to do are these four, and then I'm going to do these four. So you can just take a screwdriver, your nut driver, whatever, and just kind of get them relatively lined up. Now, we're going to use 2 of these linear bearings now when we do this. So again, the shorter side points out, the longer side points in, and that is true on both sides. This is a nut block. There. So it should look like that, where the longer side's pointing in and the shorter side's pointing out. This is where we're going to use right now 425 millimeter screws. And what you do is you can just kind of push them into these. And then remembering the long points in, the short points out. And then just go ahead and you're gonna have to find the T-nuts underneath. You may have to look depending on how kind of good you are at guessing. I actually got those too. So. Note I'm leaving them loose. So, and the same deal here. If you don't just hit them, then you can look, don't put the screw through, you just look down the hole and line them up. Okay. So we want those loose, but you know, we want them attached. We're going to go ahead and do the same over here. So we're going to grab a couple of the T-nuts. I just kind of eyeball where they might line up just to make it easier. And then we got the other two linear bearings. Again, short side pointing out, long side pointing in. Just like that. This is where we're going to use the other 4 25 millimeters. And the marker's rubbing off. These are the last 4 of these that we're going to need. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to tighten them enough where they're kind of in. But we're not going to tighten them too much. Alright. So if you did this right, there should be 4 T-nuts left in the center. So just leave those alone for now. Let's do the ends of these. So we've got 2 and 2. So we can go ahead and kind of push those in. This one I'll probably have to eyeball because I can't really see. And for these we're going to use 15 millimeter. So it's 4 on each side. We are going to use basically all 8 once we do both sides here. So these are the 15 millimeter screws. And same deal, you're going to tighten them down, but you don't want to tighten these all the way yet. Tell you what, when you miss, you get in trouble. And I missed. Now I gotta try and get my screw out. Normally I would stand up, but I don't want to block the camera here. See if any more of these are magnetic. Alright, I can't be here all day for that. So we'll leave that one, we'll get it at the end again. Well, let me see. Maybe from the edge if I can get it. Trouble is, if I lift this and tip it, all the other nuts are going to come out, and I don't want that to happen. Yeah, there we go. Alright, now we're back. Alright. Let's not do that again. Now it's in. Yeah, I mean, best bet's to look down. Can do this. I can usually judge it pretty well. So that's 4 of the 15 millimeter. Now we're going to do the same on the other side. So we're going to bring these two kind of over. Now you see how nice and loose this is. That's how we want it. Okay. So just we have these last two now. All right, so what we should have left are 4 of the 20 millimeter. And then this sort of notched piece, and then we've got 2 and 2. So what we're going to do is we take out our 2 rectangular nuts. We're going to take out our 2 14 millimeter. So there were only 2 of these that came with the kit. And the way this works is we have our nut block. We're going to put the 14 millimeter screws through the nut block, like that. This is symmetrical this way, so it doesn't really matter this orientation, but we're going to push this, basically push these through the middle hole and hold them. So underneath, you can see they're pointing in this groove. And then that's where these rectangular blocks are going to go. So you just kind of push the rectangular blocks from underneath. Rectangular blocks, rectangular nuts. So I'll get up and show you what I'm doing, so you can see it's far away. All right, so this is that piece, and there's this groove cut in it. Those rectangular nuts go in it. This nut block can go either way because this piece is symmetrical. Once we put the piece on the bed's actually symmetrical, so we can put it either way. It's just that will determine which direction we install the bed, because this side of the nut block needs to point towards the back of the stepper. Again, you do not want it too tight. You don't want it so loose that it's flopping around. How I have it here is perfect. You just want it so that it's just a hair loose. All right. Now, next step is to install this in the center. So you're going to move these nuts to kind of where they need to be roughly. And we're going to use our last 4 20 millimeter screws for this. So these are 20s. And again, you're gonna tighten these down just enough so it's not like totally flopping, but not tight. You want there to be, these need to be able to be moved. Okay. So we've essentially assembled our bed. The only 4 screws that should be tight are these 2 and these 2. Those will hold the bed together. Everything else should be loose, so you should be able to move these. Very important. Also, these should be loose. I mean, they have to be by nature because they're passing through. This should be a little bit loose. That should be loose. All right, put the bed aside for a minute. We're going to build the new frame next. So this is the front of the frame. This bearing marks the inside. This is the rear of the frame. Motor points out, coupler in. There's little feet, that's how you know what's down. Just to kind of remind everyone. First thing we're going to do is going to install our 2040 T-rail. This is where we use some of the old screws that we took out. Some of them were for this. Because they're all the same length, it doesn't really matter which ones you use. But, we're done with the new, if you notice, we're done with the new hardware. Everything else we're putting back is stuff we actually had already taken out. So we're going to build the frame. Now, I know I covered this for the original 3018 assembly video. Some of you guys may not have watched that though, because it's relatively new. You want to make sure this stuff's all flush when you assemble this stuff. You want to flush here and flush here. The key for these machines to work right is that everything is as square as possible. The best way to ensure that is for everything to be flush. If you do want to use a square, I mean, you could try, but there's not a lot of adjustability here. So usually I just try and aim for everything to be flush, because as a rule, these are usually square. Alright, so I've put the 4 screws on this side. I'm not doing anything else yet. We're just going to assemble the outer frame. So again, feet down, motor pointing out, coupler pointing in for the rear bracket. You can tighten this right up. But we are checking for flush here. I'm doing it very quickly, but okay. So once that's done, I'm going to turn this around so it's pointing the right way. We're going to take our bed. We're going to orient it so that the gap points back. That way we don't lose our orientation. So the nut block gap should be pointing back. And it should look like this. And here's what we're going to do. This is our frame we just assembled. We're going to flip it upside down so the feet are pointing up. Just like that. We're going to take the 2 new bearing rods. These are the new long ones. We insert them here and here. Alright? And then what we're going to do is we're going to line them. Their holes are in the front and back. And we're going to kind of get things lined up, and we're going to get some screws because we're basically going to attach this now. So these should fit in the gap between the J plate. See that? These should as well. So what you should be able to do is kind of maneuver them until they're where the holes are. and then put the screw through. So this was a little trick that I showed everyone in the 3018 build video. By building this upside down, it really makes things a lot easier. And now I'm going to show you a trick on how to align them as well. Note, I'm not tightening these all the way because I don't have these ones in. You don't want to put stress on them. But once you get all four lined up and in, this one is really fighting me. There we go. Once all four are in, you can tighten them. Because we're going to do a couple of things here. This is really key. This is the most important part of this entire process. And that is getting the bed centered and making sure that it moves very, very smoothly. Because if there's any binding, you're going to have problems. Again, we're doing this without the threaded rod installed. It's going to be the last thing we do. So, everything should be tight on the frame. Everything should be loose inside. What we're going to do is we can now move this, and now you can see why I had you leave this stuff loose. The idea here is that we're going to square this bed. So we want the bed to be in the center. So we want the same distance from here as is here. You generally probably want to measure. I'm just going to kind of look at it and do it. But once you get it close, move these a little bit, kind of double check it. If it looks pretty good, start with these ones and try not to move anything. Just tighten them down. Don't even tighten them real hard, just enough so there's really no motion left. So you can tighten all four of these. Now you'll notice I didn't touch them. I don't want to, because we're going to be checking this. So our next step here, tighten those. I'm just checking. We want to see how fluid. We want this to be very fluid, all the way from one end to the other. See how it's very fluid? I know now that, and again, if I'm looking, and this is, they're still playing this, right? So I can still make adjustments if I need to, but I'm getting closer because now these are tightened down, and I notice things are nice and smooth, and that's what I'm looking for. So now I'm checking again to make sure this gap and this gap and this gap and this gap are the same. And now gently I'm going to tighten these. And again, I'm not tightening them a lot yet, because I may have to adjust it. But hopefully, if you do this right. So now we're going to test again. Make sure there's absolutely no binding. It's nice and smooth. And you should be able to just touch it and it should go all the way. That's what we want to see. Nice loose bearings. So if we're happy with that, we can go ahead and tighten it all the way. Again, be careful because you can twist these. So once we tighten these all the way, we'll do one more test. Alright. So you can feel there's absolutely no binding. Consistent, and it's really nice and smooth. That is very important. Also double check and make sure you're square. Make sure this gap, this gap, this gap, and this gap are the same. I will lift it to show you what I'm talking about. This gap, this gap, this gap, and this gap should all be the same. I'm looking at this, I'm off just a hair. I mean, okay, why don't I demonstrate how we fix that? So I'm looking, and this gap here is tighter than this gap, and this gap here is tighter than that. So basically I know I'm like this a hair. So here's what I can do to correct it. I just loosen these a little bit. And actually there's two ways. You can do it the way I'm doing it, or you could do it in these corners as well. But for how much it is, I think I can do it with this. Yeah, I got plenty of play. So now I'm looking. It looks really good. I'm going to double check this. This actually feels better than it did. So that's good. I was out of square a little bit. I'm just going to gently tighten any of these back down. Still smooth. Now I see I'm very square. Looks good. Good enough for me. Actually, I feel like that did move looking at it. Okay, well, it's one way to try. We can measure it. So I got about 11. I think I'm about a millimeter off. I got 10 there, so I mean, over the course of this plate right now, I've got about a millimeter out of square, believe it or not. But just for the sake of perfection, I'm going to go ahead and fix that. And I don't want to do this again, so I'm just going to measure. Just over 10, like 10 and a half. I have 10 and a half. I have 10 and a half. 10 and a half. So on this one, it looks like 10 and a half. So sweet spot. Very smooth. So we'll tighten her up and call it done. I'm not messing this thing up. Unless it doesn't go smoothly when I tested it last time. So again, I mean, I can't stress enough, this is very important that you get right. You really do want it square, and you really do want it really smooth. Because the routing activity that's happening on the table puts stress on the stepper. Any resistance from these bearings, because they're out of square or out of sync, are going to cause issues. So that feels pretty good, nice and smooth. You will want to look and just kind of make sure this all looks even. If something's really out of kilter, you do want these as straight as possible. But if you do it this way, they should kind of fall where they want to go. I don't like to go by measurement because you don't know if these plates have a little bit. And if you only go by measuring, you could introduce something that, because you don't necessarily know everything you're measuring is exact. So I prefer to sort of do it this way because this makes it sort of find where it has the path of least resistance. Alright. So our next step is to install our threaded rod. Push it right through the front. You're going to screw it into the nut block and put your finger in. You're going to feel kind of when it hits the other end. You're going to stop. Push this in. This is an anti-backlash nut. You're going to back this off until this nut is about halfway. On the original, I had to push it all the way in. This makes a really terrible springy sound. It doesn't like that tension. I don't know why, but I found if you get it right basically in the middle, where I want it a little closer. Close enough. I mean, if there's the threads kind of dictate where it can and can't go, so you are going to have to line that up. If it makes a ton of noise, you can try adjusting it. But you don't want to thread this in until this is basically in the center, give or take. Yeah, you can already hear the squeaking. So this backlash nut may be in too far. We'll see. But now you have to thread it through this. You'll notice it's still loose. That's what we want, because the same deal we did with these, we need to do with this. We can't slide it back and forth, but honestly, once we get this situated in there, it's fixed at both ends, and that's basically straight. And we can pretty much do that now. So now you can gently slide the frame forward, feed this into the coupler, and this should be flush. You know you're right when this is flush. And then you can go ahead and just tighten one of these right now. Yeah, just one. And this is where I now I'm going to want to get this part sort of straight and equidistant, because this is fixed now and I don't want to put any undue pressure on this. So you'll feel this kind of floats in this space. And this should give you enough adjustment to kind of eyeball it in the center. And then we can tighten the 4. I think they're 20 millimeter. And when you tighten one, you'll see this whole thing might turn, so you got to kind of look at it. I'm going to do the opposite corner to kind of lock it in. Alright, these you can tighten right down, because there's really no way to mess with this. And it's not as really the same as the bearings, because this kind of finds its own center. Alright, and then the last thing is just sort of wiggle it, get it to kind of center on you, so there's no tension. Then you know this is basically right in the center where this wants to be. Push down on this so that it doesn't torque. Just gently tighten both sides for the first time until the plate goes all the way down, because again, you don't want it to twist when you're tightening these, and then you can go ahead and tighten them all the way. Alright, that's it. Everything here is tight. Remember, we only did one grub screw. Now we can actually loosen that grub screw. So I don't want this coupler tight. I want you to be able to do this. I'll show you why in a minute. It's another trick. But I'm feeling this, I'm feeling to make sure that the bed slides nice. I can only do it sort of this halfway, but I can feel that it's perfect. Now, because this isn't attached, this is floating, so you have to be careful. You can go ahead and we're gonna flip this over, and we're also gonna get it so that the back is pointed towards us. Okay? Now what I want you to do is, I want you to push the bed all the way up. Alright? If you can, secure it in this position with like a piece of tape. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a piece of Scotch tape, fold an end over, and I'm going to do this. Okay? I just don't want this to slide. I want to keep all that weight on that end. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get our gantry. And we need all these little T-nuts. Here's our gantry. And 12 of these screws go in. So we're going to put 12 in. I'll show you how to reinstall this the easy way. So we got 12 in. Now we're going to go ahead and put our T-nuts in. I'm going to demonstrate the correct direction, even though you should know this from previously installing or assembling. Just like the big ones, this is the orientation. So the bump bump. Japers, it's hard to see, isn't it? Okay. This is tough. Let me switch to left. That'll work. Okay. Hopefully, see what I'm talking about, the orientation. So, on the side I'm doing right now, it's going to look kind of like this. So the screw's going in, and I'm going to thread these on the inside like that. So the rounded side points in, the bump side, this bump right here, points towards the screw. So just to kind of, just to kind of continue that, here's the bump. I'm going to thread that into the screw. And we're basically going to screw that on, not even quite where the screw, you don't want the screw to even come out the other side. I know you can't see it, but you're going to thread this on the screw on the inside, and you don't even want the tip of the screw poking through right now. And you're going to do all 6 of them. Okay, so I can show you. I'm going to show you. I'm going to do the other side, and then I'll show you. So I'm going to turn her around, and we're going to repeat that same process. I'm going to put 6 screws in, and again, all those screws we took out are all the same length. So just pick any 6. It doesn't really matter. And I will lift this gantry and show you what I've done, because I also want to show you how these need to be oriented, because there's a very specific way these need to be oriented for this next trick to work. Because I'm going to show you a way to put this back together like super quick. You go in that, get that thing. Okay, so now I've got all 12 screws in and all 12 T-nuts installed. So, showing you what it should look like. Just like that, as far as the direction goes. Now, we're gonna, and it's probably gonna change when I move it, but we want all of these, so if the gantry's straight up and down, we want these T-nuts pointing exactly sideways on both sides. If you can see what that looks like. So some of them turned a little, but that's the orientation we need them to be in. And on both sides. I'm gonna do the rest here, because moving around they're gonna move. The other thing is, the way you want the gantry facing is with the board towards you, and either if you got the laser or the router away from you, because we're looking at the back of the machine. This is the Y-axis motor. So we have the machine backwards right now. So we want the gantry backwards. So the board should be on our side, the way I have it right now. And make sure that is the way you have it. So I'm turning all these T-nuts so they're all straight that way. Next step. We're going to take this back plate off very carefully. Remember, we taped this, so hopefully it won't slide on us. So I'm going to take this off. I'm not even going to take the screws out of it. Let's see if we can pull that off. You can take the screws out. I'm just being silly. Now, once I get this last screw out, this thing will kind of fall apart. But the frame itself will stay because the other side's all tight. Alright. So, did that right. Got all my screws to stay. That's pretty nifty. Move this out of the way. Now, the nice thing is we've taped this so this doesn't come, because what happens is this falls down and then that thing will come sliding if you don't put a little piece of tape on it. So now we're going to take our gantry and we're going to lay it right here on either side of the rail. And the nuts are going to be going in these slots, so they need to be sideways, so double check them that they didn't move. Because actually mine did. Because they're loose. Both sides. Make sure they're as straight as you can get them. And again, I know you can't see this in the camera, that's why I kind of brought it up close. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be inserting the nuts. I really don't want to move that camera. Here's a piece of T-rail to simulate. So right now, this is the outside. And what I have is I'm going to run those T-nuts here and here and slide that gantry right on. So I'll show you. We're going to gently move it towards the frame. And you're going to have to kind of lift up. And then you're going to slide them in. Just like I just did. And if one turn's going in, just gently turn it. And you'll notice, look, my gantry's on. It's on, yay. Okay? As soon as it's on, take the back part. Note that you got to get the right side down, so the side with the feet needs to go down because we're right side up. But go ahead and put that back. And then the rods. And your bearing rods. It will be better if you've got this flat and level. I'm going to move it where it's flat and level. And then again, you want to try and get this all flush as it comes together. So, that. You basically want it to be as close to it was originally as possible to avoid any chance that something weird happened with the alignment. All right. Now, bear in mind this gantry is just on. It really can't come off because it's kind of stuck. But before we secure it, let's just make sure this still slides. Oh, the tape. You can remove that tape we put on. Duh. What's holding it? The tape. Remove your tape. And then go ahead and slide it. See if anything's screwed up. It shouldn't. I've done this a few times now. And as you can see, that's nice and smooth. That's how we want it. So since that's nice and smooth, what we can do is bring it right back into the coupler. And then we check on the front to make sure it's flush. You can feel it, it is. And now we can go ahead and tighten both grub screws. So you tighten the one, give it a turn, Tighten the other one. All right. So last step is now to secure the gantry. So because we have it on, but we haven't actually tightened these yet. So the gap is no longer 46 millimeters. It is 135. Based on, no, 130, sorry. 130 millimeters or 13 centimeters. That's what we're after. And that is from the back of this to here, not to the very back, to the inside, 130 millimeters. Now when this is loose, this is going to kind of move on you. It also isn't necessarily going to be straight up and down. So you want to make sure this stays square. So if you just tighten one screw, this will actually tilt. See how I've got play? So you want to look at it and you want to make it as square as you can. And usually if you tighten the two middle ones, it'll kind of get you there. Now I'm going to remeasure. But I'm on 130 millimeters, right on. I'm going to go ahead and tighten the rest because I'm happy with this. We are going to go through the exact same procedure on the other side. I will do that next, just to be consistent and thorough. Again, make sure you're nice and square. Turn this thing around. It's a mother with all this. It's a beast now. Alright, so same deal because they're not always square from one side to the other. So, it'll be about there. I'll double check it when I get one tight. I usually tighten one just a bit. And I just double check, make sure nothing moved. That's perfect. Kind of tighten another one. I'm going to make sure it's square. The other side generally will hold it square, but it's good to kind of make sure everything's square. Alright, once the center ones are tight, we're kind of good to do the rest. All right. Last step is to reattach your Y stepper wire. Goes right back where it was. Should have been the only wire you removed, other than the power and whatnot. Again, I'm going to be setting up drag chains. That's why this is a mess right now. But you're done. You should now have a fully assembled 3036. And you'll want to go ahead and fire up easel, and you'll change your dimensions in easel. Otherwise, it should really operate the same way. If you have binding with the motor, that's where you're going to have to kind of go back. It's tough to do with the gantry on, but you got to kind of loosen the screws on the bottom of the table and get everything straight. This, if you don't get it quite square, this could add a teeny bit of twist enough to bind. Hopefully, if you follow the process I just showed you, and it was nice and free right up until the end, you won't have any trouble. Now, you will have some extra parts. You're going to have 10 T-nuts, and you're going to have 10 corresponding screws that go to those T-nuts. Keep them for spares. You don't really need them. And then you are going to have this leftover hardware I had mentioned before, the original Y-axis components. So, that should get you going. I didn't use any Loctite. Some people Loctite, there is a lot of vibration on these machines, so I won't say it's a terrible idea, but any metal to metal contact could potentially use Loctite. I would say the nuts underneath it are upside down. Could potentially use it. Generally I don't use permanent Loctite for this sort of thing, because again, you may need to tune it or change it, and you may not want to make that permanent. So I don't always, if I were to use Loctite on this, it wouldn't be permanent. There are actually different types of Loctite. So yeah, I mean, you can do that. It's kind of like what your experiences are, really, like what kind of routing you're doing, what kind of material you're working with. If you're using softer materials, a lot of times you won't see these things come loose. A good practice is to just go around and check your nuts and your bolts and make sure everything's tight. If you do start seeing things loosen, then it's probably best to flip it and check all of them. If you're diligent about checking the tightness, you can probably get away without using Loctite. Otherwise, there you go. Hopefully you find this helpful, and it's a bit of work, but I can do this probably about a half an hour without doing all the sort of voiceover and everything, having to demonstrate. So it's probably half hour, 40 minutes worth of work. But you won't be doing this repetitively, so it's going to likely take you about this long because you're probably following along with the video. In any event, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the group, or reach out to support if it's more formal in nature, but we'll get you going either way. Hope you enjoyed this and have fun. Jungle.